Hey, Teddy K here for the Best Buy blog, and in this video we've got the Microsoft Surface Duo. Pretty unique device, and we're finding the best ways to make the best use out of it. Had I gotten to try the Microsoft Surface Duo when it first launched, I don't know that I would have had the same opinion that I have of it now, several months after it first came out, and after Microsoft has put out a few different updates that have really improved upon its performance. So I didn't really want to review this the way I would typically review a product. I wanted to look at it and see, okay, ultimately, who is this for and how is it useful? And so there are about a handful of different things that I have identified as being really useful for me, and they might be for you as well. The first one I think is pretty obvious when you're talking about a dual display. I mean, there are two 5.6-inch displays here. They're beautiful. They work well together, despite the fact that there is that hinge, and they're obviously separated by that. This isn't a dual screen product like, say a Samsung Galaxy Fold 2, for example. You're not going to get that, but in this case, you can still use the screens together. So for me, when it came to researching or just looking anything up, referencing, researching, anything that where you would benefit from having two displays to look at, to compare, contrast, whatever you want to do, it just is so much easier when you have two screens to do that. And it feels really natural doing it here, because if you want to have two web browsers, for example, you could have two of them open. You could have Edge and you could have Chrome, or DuckDuckGo, like the one I like to use, and go that way. If you're shopping for something, you can have two different web browsers open at the same time as well and search for the same item, different websites, compare prices. Anything to do with shopping, anything to do with referencing, anything to do with research, all of it can be applicable to using the two displays. Honestly, I mean, the examples are probably too countless to mention in a video like this, but I think if you are the type of person who likes to look things up, or likes the idea of being able to compare and contrast on the same device without having to switch apps and things like that, you cannot go wrong here, because I certainly didn't. Number two is reading. Now, I'm specifically talking about ebooks and even comic books. I'm going to get to the comics in a second, but first the ebooks. So e-readers obviously can already handle that, and they do it really, really well, and the e-ink displays are great for just being easy on the eyes. But when you have two displays to work with in a split screen like this, you are essentially separating an ebook like you would a normal book. So now two pages separate, right? You open it up, and literally when you flip the pages, it feels almost like it's the real thing. Even though 5.6 inches is a little smaller than a typical e-reader would be, although most e-readers right now are at 6 inches, so it's not a huge difference. But in the same, and if you wanted to, I don't know, increase the text size, you could do that. You could do all the things that you normally would do anyway, because obviously the apps are the same. So whether it's Kindle, Kobo, Scribd, or whatever it is you want to use to read, the same features would apply. So however you want to sort of set up the reading the way you do, even if you flip it around all the way and you just have the text on one side, you can do that also. Nothing really changes there. With comics, it's the same thing. Although with comics, I found it really, really interesting, because on the one hand, I can have two different comic apps open at the same time. So if I wanted to read one and then maybe look at another one for some kind of a reference, for example, maybe there's something story related between the two, I could do that. If I wanted to read something retro on Marvel Unlimited, I could do that, or read something that is newer, whether it's on DC or Marvel's latest app as well. So a lot of different combinations there with comics. Again, the smaller display, not ideal entirely for comics, especially compared to a tablet, but I think just the way that the split screens work in this regard is pretty cool. Now you can actually move an app so that it covers both displays. So you could have the comic kind of covering the whole thing, but I don't know. I found that it wasn't quite as good unless it was a newer comic where there's a more guided reading. But that's just, that was just my experience anyway. Number three is staying organized. Naturally, when you have a device like this, but really, and I think this applies for any smartphone or tablet, you're going to want to use apps if you can to keep things organized. Just to keep things where they should be, so that like whether it's a calendar or to-do list, what have you. All those things apply here too, only the difference in this case is that you can look at them at the same time. So if you had a calendar, for example, open on one side and then a to-do list on another, or you had a shopping list and then you had a website open so you can compare prices, whatever it is. Again, it's kind of similar to the whole research and reference point that I made earlier. In this case, staying organized really depends on what it is you like to use. The point is that you're able to use them at the same time. So you can have two apps open, or you can switch between them, move them, between screens. I mean, whatever it is that works for your workflow when it comes to getting organized, it's pretty simple. I find this actually probably be the most subjective of all the points, because everybody likes to be organized in their own way. And so I think if given a chance, you would find that this device is really, really made for such a purpose. Number 3 would be video. And video is an obvious one because naturally you have two displays. So what you can do, of course, is have the video play on one display and leave the other one open to whatever it is you want to do. Now, of course, if you're going to tweet while watching a sporting event or something like that, very easy to do that, because again, like, even just holding it like this, I'm able to do whatever I want. I can message people, I could tweet, I could do whatever really I wanted to. I could look up a stat. Again, it's kind of similar to what I've been talking about already, about having reference points or just being able to look things up. It applies also to video. So you can't play two videos at the same time. So there's no way to play, let's say, a hockey game or a basketball game on one screen and then have a YouTube video going on the other. That's not going to work, but you could at least have the video playing on one screen and then also have something completely different on the other app. So even if you were making plans with someone while having the video on, you could totally do that. If you want to follow along, let's say something tech support related, so you have a video that is instructing you what to do and you're able to do it on the device itself, as something you need to set up, you could do that also. A lot of different, there's just a lot of different scenarios that I find really, really work with a split screen device like this. And that would be one of them, especially when it comes to video, where whether it's productivity or just consumption, you have a lot of different options. So next up are video games. And this another is, actually kind of fortuitous timing, because Microsoft, as of May of 2021, issued an update to Xbox Game Pass in particular that actually did something for this particular device. So for the Surface Duo, they made it possible so that the game itself, the gameplay itself, could play on one screen while the controls are on the other. If you remember the Nintendo DS, that's kind of how that device was built, right? You had the screen on one side and then you had the controls on the other. And this is emulating that in a lot of ways. Of course, it's entirely touchscreen in this case, and well, it's not always perfect in that regard. There are dozens of games to work with, but obviously games that will require a lot of player movement will take a little time to get used to, because you don't have that tactile feel of moving the character around. The joystick, of course, being entirely just on screen. So you don't have that kind of mobility. Although you could always pair a controller with the Surface Duo, like you would with any other Android device, and play that way too. So what I liked about this was that, despite the fact that Microsoft never really positioned the Surface Duo as a gaming device, it doesn't mean it can't be taken that way. And granted, look, it's not the gaming device in the same way like an Asus ROG phone is going to be, but still, if you're playing on Xbox Game Pass, if you're playing a game on an emulator, or even a game that you've downloaded on Google Play, you could do it in such a way where, again, the screen real estate is split so that you're not pressing soft buttons over the gameplay, as an overlay over the gameplay, right? In this case, they're separate from the gameplay itself, and to me, that's definitely a winner, because I remember seeing this with other split, two dual screen phones before. Obviously, this is not the first one that's come out, and it just works so well, and here was no exception. And naturally, because the internals work well, the screen is beautiful. I gotta say, it sold me as a mobile gaming device, which was not something that I thought would be possible until that update. Before I go, there are a couple other things that I should mention, I guess honorable mentions for what this device can do. One is that you can actually use this with a Windows PC. So if you wanted, for example, you wanted notifications and calls and everything to go to your PC instead of, so that way you can actually access them from the computer, you can do that. It's actually pretty easy. Use the Your Phone app on your Windows PC and you should be easily able to connect to. Another thing is a Microsoft Remote Desktop. So if you want to reverse that so that you can access your computer onto the Surface Duo, you can do that as well. It's not the best in terms of how it looks because obviously it's not optimized for a device like this. But seeing Windows on a Surface Duo is pretty cool and ironic. But it is something you can do as well if you wanted to have at least some access to, say it's a work machine or even a personal computer that you need to do something with. You can do so from this device as well. So in closing, I think ultimately, this device has already come a long way in just some months. I mean, it hasn't even launched. It's not even a year old, and yet it feels like it's come a long way. At least compared to what I had read about it when it first launched, compared to now, it has definitely made some big strides. But as is, I think it's still a device that is not for everybody. And so even if you like a couple of things that I mentioned here that you can do, I don't know that that's enough of a reason to get it. But I do think that if you feel like whether it's consumption or workflow or whatever it is that you feel you could really benefit from, even things that I haven't even brought up here, then it might be worth checking out. And that is my take on the Microsoft Surface Duo and some of the cool things you can do with it. For the Best Buy blog, I'm Teddy K. Thanks for watching.